Sherryta, Martin, it is great to have both of you here. Excited to talk about how both of you made the journey from the court to the athletic director's office. First question I want to ask, talk a little bit more about kind of that journey. I know both of you at one point or another were outside of athletics or thought you might be outside of athletics. And Sherryta, I want to start with you because as I recall, at one point you were going to be an orthopedic surgeon.
Oh, well, okay, yes. So that's just taking it back a little ways. When I came into college, I thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon. I came into Dartmouth as a bio major who was pre-med. And that quickly changed. I think, as a student, you kind of find your way, you find your passions, you also find what makes sense for you as well. And so, yeah, I transitioned out of that very quickly. I worked in the athletics department. I was in the office stuffing envelopes and, helping out the administration there. So I had a quick exposure to athletic administration, which certainly exposed me to the role that I'm in now.
So talk a little bit about your why. I mean, obviously, when you were in college, there was a passion that was sparked, and you wanted to pursue it. Talk about kind of that moment, and even today, what motivates you to do what you do every single day.
Yeah, I don't think I found my why for why work in college athletics until later on in my career. Being exposed to athletics, being a student athlete, being around the industry was helpful. But understanding what it is that drove me to do the job that I do didn't come until later on. I think, working very closely with student athletes at Dartmouth and then to Temple, to Penn, to now Lafayette, my why is seeing them achieve their goals, achieving their academic goals, achieving their athletic goals, and having positive experiences. And when you have the ability to impact that for them, that's my why. And so I know what kind of experience I had. I certainly enjoyed my time at Dartmouth and enjoyed cutting down the nets and participating in the NCAA tournament. And I want to be able to provide those kinds of experiences for my student athletes wherever I am.
I think that's awesome. I think it's great. Martin, so obviously, you came into this world in a family, growing up in college athletics, growing up around it. But I know when you graduated, you spent 26 years kind of on the business side of athletics and then made the decision to come back. Talk a little bit about that journey.
Well, different from Sherryta, I didn't have the intelligence that she had to even think about being a doctor. So athletics was kind of in my DNA growing up, and as you said. I really enjoyed the business side of things. I had a dad that was a coach and then later an athletics director, and really tried to talk me out of becoming an athletic director or a coach. And I thought that's what I wanted to do when I got into college. And so it wasn't really, I knew how much I loved athletics and the passion I had for athletics, and I also love shoes. I did a commercial for Converse when I was a little kid, and so this was kind of the best way to marry those two passions. So I went to work for Converse for 13 years and then Nike, and really had no desire to be an athletics director, but there was something that kept tugging me back to giving back to student athletes and to a college campus. And so that's really kind of how this journey went. If you'd asked me 15 years ago, 10 years ago, did I want to be an athletic director? No. If you asked me when I was 21, absolutely not. I'm having the best time of my life doing this.
Awesome. So talk to me a little bit, same question. Talk about your why. Where do you get your energy every day to come in and just push and drive further? Where does that come from?
Those 360 plus student athletes. I mean, it's I'm getting older in age. She's very young. She'll feel this one day. But as you get older, being around 18 to 22-year-olds and that energy that you get off them, and really being able to, where it used to be about me and my family, being able to give back and make it more about them and their families, and being able to help shape them as individuals for their life beyond athletics. And I think that's the beauty of being an athletics director. We have that ability to really change and mold young people.
Wonderful. Sherryta, talk a little bit, as an athlete, you have so many different experiences. You're building so many different character traits. You're learning hard work. You're learning perseverance. You're learning how to be a teammate. What are a couple of things that you've taken from your experience as a student athlete into your role as an athletic director?
All of those things that you mentioned, certainly hard work, perseverance, building confidence in yourself, kind of being able to get back down when you're knocked down, or get back up when you're knocked down. It's one of those things where, I think about it and say, if I have a challenging moment that's coming up, how did I prepare for this? As a student athlete, you kind of utilize some of those things. It's practice, it's going out there and giving it everything that you've got and learning from your performance out there. So whatever it is that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, going out and giving it the very best that you can, and whether you feel like you came out on top or whether you need more experience or more practice, that's something you go back and you work on it and you go back out there and you do it again. But certainly, learning how to take criticism, learning how to be a good teammate, learning how to motivate and lead others. Those are things that you acquire as a student athlete that you don't even know when it's happening when you're using it sometimes, but when you're reminded of those situations, or when you're trying to articulate to student athletes why their experience is so impactful for them right now and what they're going to learn from it later on, you start to reflect on those moments and really understand that those times where you weren't necessarily playing in your first freshman year and you had to earn your way onto the court and you had to support your teammates and understand what that feels like, you use that later on in life. And it's so important. That student athlete experience is so important in lots of professions, but certainly in the profession of being a leader of others.
And it's interesting to hear you say that those qualities sometimes are just innate. You don't even consciously know, and it's just something that you learned years ago that's just become a part of who you are. Yeah. And I think that's so wonderful about that experience. So Martin, I'm going to ask you kind of the same question. Consciously or unconsciously, when do you find yourself drawing on those skills, abilities, and characteristics that you work so hard to develop on the court?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me is that realizing that relationships matter. I mean, I look back at some of the greatest relationships, and I'm sure you're the same way. Some of the best relationships I have, authentic relationships, are those teammates that I had. And realizing how important that is as you move on in your career, that relationships really do matter. You're going to fight. You're going to love one another, you're going to cry together, you're going to laugh together, you're going to hate each other at times. I mean, I've got a dear friend of mine who just passed away 2 years ago, with my college roommate. And although we separated for a while, we hooked back up about 8 years ago when I moved back to Birmingham. And that relationship we picked up like we were 21, 22 years old again. And so the relationship piece of it really matters. I think the other thing, and my dad actually mentioned this to me, was the importance of roles and knowing your expectations. And he said Coach Rupp did an interesting thing with them when he was at the University of Kentucky. They'd just come off a national championship. He was on the second team. First team was really good, made up the Olympic team actually, and he took them in a practice and he made all of the first team play different roles. So the center was the point guard, the two-man was the four-man, the three, and so on and so forth, whereas the second team stayed within their current roles and they beat the heck out of the first team. And so understanding the importance of roles, and not only having those roles, but being able to explain those roles and what their expectations are, I think are really important, that I've kind of carried on. And then probably the other thing that's important to me is learning how to fail. You're the same way. I mean, we didn't shoot 100% from the floor, and I was the turnover king. But I learned how to fail and not let mistakes define me. You think about how many mistakes you make as an 18 to 22-year-old. And especially today with social media, those mistakes can define you if you let them. And so I think it's really important to take that as we go forward and just learn that we're going to fail, we're going to make mistakes, but don't let them define you.
I think that's excellent. And I love, too, that you've clearly come out of that experience with some wonderful analogies that you can take into the business environment when you talk about getting everybody in the right position and the right seats. And I'm sure in both of your roles, there's times where we got to move people around and get them in the seats where they can succeed, and to be able to give them an example of, this is so that you can succeed as an individual, but also so that we can succeed as a group. I think it's fantastic. So, Martin, I'm going to hit you with a second one. And a big part of being an athlete is competing. And you're getting that fix on the court for 4 years, and then you get out and you're in the business world, you're an AD. Where's your competition fix today? How do you channel that energy?
Well, probably took it out on my wife and kids. I just beat the heck out of my kids in any sport that we played. No, I do think it's a challenge. I played basketball. I got into golf and got into tennis because I needed that adrenaline rush from winning and competing. And like I said, my wife and kids probably got a lot of, I came from a very competitive family. I mean, everything we did, if we sat down at the dinner table, you know, it was, all right, well, I'm gonna finish my peas before you finish your peas. And so probably started with them, with my family. And then I think as it's moved in, you're kind of drawn to people that are similar to you. So a lot of my friends, those relationships that I talked about, were former student athletes, and we would play golf together, and we'd still play basketball together. A lot of smack talking, and but that's probably how I got that energy from competing, and still have it.
All right, Sherryta, where are you getting your fix?
So for a few years, or for several years after I finished up, I was still playing. I was the noon hoops queen, and for some periods of time there, I was noon hoops, and then after work hours too. I don't play so much. As you get older, you realize your joints don't respond as well to those to the pounding on the court. But I feel like I'm a competitor in everything I do. Like, I try to make a game out of things, and people know that I'm always trying to win no matter what it is. And, you know, whether it's a card game or, you know, trying to go out and, you know, and shake it up in some other area. My friends know, my family knows that, you know, I'm competing in everything. And I try to utilize my day-to-day responsibilities and think about those as an opportunity to perform, as an opportunity to compete. And if you have that innate characteristic, you're looking at, you know, opportunities to shine and to be a winner. And so, you know, whether it's athletically related or just, you know, going out there and I've got to give a great presentation, well, this is an opportunity for me to perform on the highest stage. And so I try to, you know, create these little games for myself, you know, throughout that time frame. But yeah, picking up golf now. I was exposed to it years ago and really took some time away, but, you know, recognizing that that's a game that I can probably play, you know, as I get older. And it's certainly fun to get out there and to constantly try to improve upon your game. So golf is probably the next one for me.
Well, I applaud your picking up of that sport. I surrendered very early in my professional career. I'm really good at driving a golf cart, drinking beer, and getting snacks.
Well, that's part of it too.
That's right. That's right.
You're gonna learn how to fail a lot in golf.
And I can tell a few jokes. You know, we can. So I want to ask you this question. Think today, obviously, as you think about the experience of your student athletes, what are some of the biggest differences from when you were a student athlete? What are some of the biggest challenges that exist today that didn't exist then? And how are you helping your student athletes to navigate?
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, while we recognize that there are a lot of differences, I think it's still the same. You know, it's still, you know, trying to manage being a student and being an athlete. I think the pressures of today are certainly heightened with the social media aspects of things. You know, students' careers, their day-to-day lives are on such a larger stage, and so many people are exposed to what they're doing. And so that's not something that, even for me in my experience in the late 90s and early 2000s, that has changed over the last few years. But, you know, how do I try to help them? You know, I try to relate to them in terms of being able to explain what my experience was like, but certainly, you know, being there as a sounding board, being there to provide a resource, to direct them where they need assistance is my job no matter what. But certainly being able to relate to their experiences, I think, helps them understand, like, hey, she's been through this. So, you know, I can certainly take a little bit more value into what she's offering in terms of how I should proceed with whatever it is. But, you know, they certainly have a challenging time ahead of them in terms of where we are in the world today. But, you know, in some ways, it's not that different.
And I'm sure it's an incredible advantage to be able to say, you know, I've been in your shoes, and both in quickly understanding kind of what their needs are, what their experience is, but also in, you know, getting their buy-in to some of the ideas that you might bring to your student athletes. And I want to ask you, you know, there are obviously a lot of folks that aren't former student athletes that have made it in this industry, and somebody that's watching this that doesn't have the background of being a student athlete, what's your advice to them so that they can, you know, have the same level of success and hopefully get to the same level of understanding of the athlete's experience?
Yeah, I think what you pointed out is having a level of understanding. I think the first thing that someone who maybe wasn't a student athlete has to understand is they have to respect and at times admire what our student athletes are doing. And if you have that internally, I think the student athletes will understand that and will feel that in what you do in terms of the level of care that you exude, the level of concern and attention that you provide to the student athletes. They'll feel that, and that will be visible if you start with a level of respect and admiration for what they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But certainly, reading up on, lots of different things will help someone who hasn't had that experience, being a strategic thinker, learning leadership styles and aspects of how to have relationships and engage with people. You don't have to have been an athlete to do this job, but it certainly helps to be able to engage with student athletes on that level.
And I love what you said, where it starts almost as if it's really where your heart's at as you come to them, and they're going to see that. And if it's genuine and you care, that's really what they're going to make them receptive. That's really what's going to make them buy in. That's wonderful. Martin, so talk to me again. Same question. Think back to your experience. Think to the experience of student athletes today, and are there big differences that stand out to you?
I'm a lot older than Sherryta, so we didn't even have a three-point line when I played. But yeah, there's a huge difference, and I think the biggest thing for me is that social media has changed everything. Every one of these student athletes are worried about their brand, and we didn't have to deal with that. We worried about the team and playing, and I think the other difference is the outside influences now. I can remember calling my dad after we got a new coach. My coach died after my sophomore year of a heart attack. We got a new coach, and I can remember calling him and going, man, he's yelling at me every day. I mean, it's ridiculous. And he goes, let me tell you something. When he stops yelling at you, that's when you need to worry. And today, what happened, the option was never to leave, because he used to always say that the first time you quit is hard. It becomes easier the second, the third, and the fourth time. We got over 800 kids in the transfer portal in men's basketball alone, because the outside influences to them are now telling them, if you don't get what you want, then it's time to leave and move on. There's greener grass. And so that's probably the biggest change that I've seen, is that kids, it's too easy to quit today. And what happens then, we look at it from an athletic standpoint, but then you also have to look at it from a work standpoint. It's going to be hard for me to hire somebody that's transferred 2 or 3 times or that's quit. It's hard for me to hire somebody that's quit another job because they're going to quit on me, they're going to quit on their family. And so I think it's although I see what you're saying, I do think there's a lot of differences. Now, again, I'm a lot older, because there's just influences out there now that weren't there when we played. Parents were more, this is what you're going to do, and this is why you're going to do it, and you're not going to quit. And today, everything's just kind of okay.
Yeah, and that's a very real challenge, and I'm curious to kind of how you address that, because you can't control the messages that they're receiving until they show up. You can't control the messages that they're receiving outside when they leave. And how do you combat that "it's all about you" message when you're trying to deliver the message of "it's all about the team"?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what Sherryta said. I think you've got to be authentic with them. You've got to be real. You've got to tell them the truth. If you're telling a kid he's going to come in and he's going to shoot 25 times a game and he's going to start every game, he's got to earn that. And so I think you've got to be truthful and real with them. And I think if you'll do that, then they understand. There's that old saying, they don't care what you know till they know that you care. Sure. They'll believe that you care. And when you truly care more about them as a person than just their athletic ability. I mean, I spend more time talking to our student athletes, and I'm sure you do as well, about their academic side. Very, very seldom do I say, hey, how you doing in practice, or how's this going on? But I'll talk to them about, how you doing in class, man? You going to class? How's your social life? Everything going okay there? Because then they start realizing that, look, he cares more about me than just a number on a jersey.
That's great. So I want to ask both of you this question. I think it's, hopefully there's some young student athletes that are saying, I want to be you someday. So Martin, I'm going to start with you. If there's a young athlete that's saying, I want to grow up and be an athletic director someday, what advice would you give to that student athlete?
I think, first of all, you've got to any chair that you sit in, you've got to have high character. You've got to have high integrity. We're in a tough, competitive world, but character and integrity matters. So I think that's number one. I think you've got to be passionate about it. If you look at this position or this chair as a job, you're not going to make it, because most jobs are 9 to 5 or what. You're not going to make it. This is a passion, and if you're not passionate about it and love sports and love people, then you're going to have a hard time in this profession. So I would say, first of all, make it your passion. Then I would say that you've got to make sure that you have a plan, and you've got to really work your plan. and your process and know how I'm going to get there, network with people, talk to people. And then the last thing, you got to have a great work ethic because, in this business, you're not going to be able to get it on 40 hours a week. You've got to be, I mean, how many phone calls do you get at 10, 11 o'clock at night and, then you're up the next morning for 7 o'clock? Yeah, exactly. So you've got to have a strong work ethic.
I think that's great advice. And I want to ask you to expand on just a couple of things because I think you touched on some great points. So you talk about the passion and, sometimes it can be a grind. And what do you do to stay connected to that? Because, those times when it's really hard, you're fundraising, you're talking to, what do you do to stay in touch with that passion? What's your routine?
I've got 2 grandkids, and so when I get feeling sorry for myself, which I do frequently, I go spend time with them because I know they're gonna lift me up. I used to when my dad was alive. I'd have phone conversations with him a lot. We talked a lot, but I think the key is just being able to get away from it at times and putting it on the shelf and not letting it define you. Not let it look. I'm the athletics director. No, I'm just somebody that's here to serve others, and it's amazing when you focus more on serving as opposed to observing. It's amazing what you can accomplish.
Well, that focus on serving as opposed to observing. So the second thing I want to ask you a little bit more about, when you talk about plan, that strikes to intentionality. Get tactical with me for a second. What's one way that you're intentional with how you spend your time?
Every morning I sit down before. I'm an early riser, and I'm sure you are as well. And as you get older, you'll do it because you have to. But I get up every morning and I'll sit down with kind of the things that I want to get done today. Not the things I have to get done, but the things I want to get done today. And I'll kind of go through those things and look at them. And then I'll look at the things that are really important. And so the list could be very long. And then I'll go, okay, now what things are really important that are going to be able to serve others, that are going to be able to help others, not necessarily what is in the best interest of me. And when I do that every morning, then it kind of takes me out of the mindset that it's all about me, and it puts it on somebody else. And so I think I try to be real intentional with that. And then also understanding that once you get into your day, it's not yours. You don't own it anymore, because I may have great intentions that I set out at 5:30 in the morning, but by 10 o'clock that morning, it's done, it's shot, and I'm off to something else because my schedule has been pulled elsewhere. And I think you've got to have flexibility in these roles.
That's great advice. Sherryta, I'm going to ask you the same question. Okay. If there is a young student athlete who says, how do I end up like you? What can I start doing right now to prepare myself for a great career in athletics? What advice do you give them?
I think I will, add a little bit to his comments, but, I would say that they should be thinking about how they can have the greatest impact, and not necessarily the job itself. So, where do I have my passion? Where can I have the greatest impact on young people, and start there? I don't think either one of us set out to say that we were going to be athletic directors by this time frame. And I think going into it with that goal in mind may not be the best way to approach it from my perspective. But thinking about, how can I have an impact in compliance or marketing, whatever aspect of athletics it is, and doing the very best job from the seat that I'm in right now today is where I think people should focus. And then thinking about how can I be better, how can I have the greatest impact, how can I be exposed to more, and taking that as it comes. Being ambitious, being motivated is all part of the game, and part of what you need to be, part of how you need to be, but certainly not thinking so far ahead that you miss the opportunity that's right in front of you.
So I'm gonna ask you to go a little bit deeper. You brought in 2, I think, really important topics. The first one, focusing on the outcomes and focusing on the group of people that you want to create outcomes for. So, same thing. Give me an example of how, I'm working in development, and how can I think that tactically? How can I apply that teaching?
Yeah, wherever you are, I think talking to mentors and understanding, how they've gotten to where they've gotten to is important. So I think that's an intentional thing that you can do. Building relationships with people and not burning bridges, because you never know who it is that you're going to be interacting with or interviewing with. And so, just being present in the moment and understanding that, engaging and having strong relationships with people in general is so critical. But I certainly go back to, making sure that you're doing the very best job that you can in the position that you're in, and looking at that as, here's an opportunity for me to show that I am the best and the brightest in my particular role, so that when that next opportunity comes about, I can speak intelligently about what I've accomplished, and I can talk about what it is that I can offer to that next opportunity. And I think that's so important for people to understand that.
I love that you touched on recruiting mentors. I think that's one of the most important skills in life, and sometimes the hardest thing to get over is just making the ask. And I think it's a great thing to highlight, and being intentional about it. Go find somebody that's been where you want to be. Talk to me a little bit, you mentioned as you were talking about expanding your experience. So certainly, I have a role, I'm in that role today. Again, what advice would you give to somebody who says, so how do I do that? I'm in development, I want to learn more about facilities, I want to learn more about compliance. What's your advice to them if they want to start expanding their horizons as they're doing the job they're assigned?
Volunteer where you are. So we talk about mentors. I think some of your greatest opportunities for mentors are the people that you're currently working with or working for. All of the people that have hired me in the past remain people that I feel like I can rely on and pick up the phone and call and talk to them about different opportunities, talk to them about issues or concerns. And so I think relying on the people that you have right there in front of you to learn from them is so important. But trying to get additional experiences is just a matter of saying, hey, how can I help you with that next event? Is there something on your plate that you think I can assist you with? And just being available to serve others is important. And so in my experience, walking in and having a conversation about where I am in my career today and being able to say, but there are so many other things that I'd love to be exposed to. Is there something else that I can do to have a greater impact on this organization? And I've never once been told, well, there's nothing else you can do. In this business, we are all understaffed, or I feel like most of us are understaffed. There's always something else that someone can do. But remember, you got to be doing the very best job that you can in the role you have. But once you've accomplished that, there's something else that someone would say, you know what, I think you can help me with this. And taking advantage of those opportunities are great ways to get more.
I love the soundbite, volunteer where you are. I think that's fantastic. Well, Sherryta, Martin, thank you both so much for sitting down and sharing your wisdom, sharing your stories. This was great.
No, it's a lot of fun, and thank you, Sherryta. I learned a lot.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks.